Namaste and welcome to the Vedanta Society of Greater Houston and our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Om Sarva Jiva Papanashakaranam Bhaveshwaram Swikritang cha garbhavasa deha pashamidrisham Yapitam svalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Yapitam svalilaya cha yena divya jivanam Tannamami Deva Deva Ramakrishnam Ishwaram. Om Shri Vivekanandari Satchishya Supujitaya Shri Sharada Devya Virata Sevitaya Shri Ramakrishna Paramahamsaya Avatara Varishtaya Chate Namaha. We salute Sri Ramakrishna, God of gods and Lord of existence, who of his own free will took on human birth and lived a luminous life of divine play for the destruction of human ills. We salute that incarnation of God, Paramahamsa Ramakrishna, who was worshipped by pure-hearted disciples like Vivekananda, and who was ceaselessly served by Sri Sarada Devi, the Divine Mother herself. Om Tava Katamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhiriditam Kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimaratatam Bhuvi Grinanti Ye Bhurida Jana. O Lord, your nectar-like words are praised by the wise and full of auspiciousness. They destroy the curse of evil, bring good to those who hear them, and bring new life to those who are scorched by the ills of worldly existence. Magnanimous indeed are they who spread your message. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So today we will continue with our study of the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, and we are on page 297, continuing with Wednesday, September 26th, 1883. So this being a Wednesday, not many people had come to Dakshineshwar because it was a working day. But Rakal and Latu, later Swamis Brahmananda and Adbhutananda, they were there. They were living with Sri Ramakrishna at that time, and M had come in the afternoon. So again, it was just a few people gathered with him on this Wednesday afternoon. So in the midst of the conversation, Sri Ramakrishna changes topic and says, once a Vedantic monk came here. He used to dance at the sight of a cloud. He would go into an ecstasy of joy over a rainstorm. He would get very angry if anyone came near him when he meditated. One day I came to him while he was meditating, and that made him very cross. He discriminated constantly. Brahman alone is real, and the world is illusory. Since the appearance of diversity is due to Maya, he walked around with a prism from a chandelier in his hand. One sees different colors through the prism. In reality, there is no such thing as color. Likewise, nothing exists in reality except Brahman. But there is an appearance of the manifold because of Maya, egoism. He would not look at an object more than once, lest he should be deluded by Maya and attachment. He would discriminate while taking his bath at the sight of birds flying in the sky. He knew grammar. He stayed here for 3 days. One day he heard the sound of a flute near the embankment and said that a man who had realized Brahman would go into samadhi at such a sound. So this is the monk that he would that we read about in the Great Master, that would come out of his cottage, or that was the kutir. There was only one cottage in the Panchavati at that time where this monk was staying. He would come out of the cottage in the morning and in the evening, and he would look around and he would sing and dance, or he would clap his hands and dance and say, "Oh, Divine Mother, what a wonderful Maya you have created." That is, just seeing all of this, he would dance in ecstasy at the wonder of Maya. Not at the beauty of things, so that might have been there too, because it says that he would go into ecstasy over a rainstorm, and he would dance at the sight of a cloud. So certainly the experience of beauty was part of it also, but part of it was just the mysterious power of Maya that brings out of the one non-dual reality all of this diversity, and that one reality which is absolute stillness. But out of that comes all of this dynamic activity and change. So it was a very wonderful example of one who had gone deep into the teachings and to the experience of Advaita, and how he reacted at the very sight of the world. But Sri Ramakrishna goes on, and this is not discussed in like the Great Master, these details, that he would get very angry if anyone approached him at the time of meditation. And so generally we think, well, a saint shouldn't get angry. A saint should always be like this and should forbear everything. Well, for us, forbearance is a practice that we should do. We should try to forbear things. But when a person attains to that state, then there are no such rules. It's said in the Native American tradition that when one becomes an elder, that is, just through the natural process of aging, when one has become a senior Native American citizen, then one is allowed to say anything. That you don't have to guard your words anymore. That as you're growing up, you have to be careful what you say, and you have to be careful what you say to elders and all of that. But you attain to, just by the aging process, you attain to an age where you should be free to say anything that you like. And so that is much more true of one who has attained to a high degree of spirituality. So you find Sri Ramakrishna, he had the full range of emotions, nothing that was destructive, nothing that was bad, nothing that came from a bad place. And that was true of this sadhu also. But he was protective of his meditation, and he would not allow anyone to approach him, and would become very cross. And so even with Sri Ramakrishna, he became cross when he approached him at the time of his meditation. So Sri Ramakrishna continues that he discriminated constantly that Brahman alone is real and the universe is illusory. And so he was obviously a follower of the path of knowledge, a follower of Jnana Yoga, and a follower of non-dualistic Vedanta. And so that idea was constantly in his mind. And so he says that he even walked around with a prism in his hand, one that he had taken from a chandelier. And that was to remind him that diversity comes through the power of Maya. That as light in itself has no color, but when coming through the prism, it manifests color. So, of course, one with the scientific education today could say, well, actually, it's just separating colors. Sri Ramakrishna says that color doesn't really exist. And so one could say, well, the prism, actually, Sri Ramakrishna was technically wrong. Maybe the example is, as an example, it's okay, but technically is wrong because the prism just separates the wavelengths of light. And so you see color. But no, actually, there is no color. Color is the mind's reaction to a wavelength of light. So even scientists say that there is no color in nature. The mind produces color. So even technically here, Sri Ramakrishna was right. Though that's not so important because it was the point he was making that is important. It just so happens that he was technically correct also here. And Sri Ramakrishna says, likewise, nothing exists in reality except for Brahman, that all of this diversity is an appearance. And so that, of course, is an extremely difficult thing to understand because, or even if we understand it intellectually, if we accept the idea of Brahman and the one reality, and out of that, through Maya, all of this has come, we can get some sort of intellectual familiarity with the concepts, and it seems rational enough. Not proven, but at least rational enough if you accept the basic propositions. But for one who takes up the practice of the path of knowledge, that has to become more than just an intellectual understanding. That, yeah, I understand how the concepts work. There's Brahman, that's one, and non-dual, and then there's Maya, and it projects out this diversity. Yeah, I got it. No, I don't got it. I've just got some ideas. I just playing with ideas. So that's where we start. We start, and especially in the path of knowledge. Ideas are important in devotion too, but especially in the path of knowledge. Those are the main tools that you have. You start with an understanding of the ideas, but then you hold on to them until those ideas go deep and you begin to see the truth of them, not just the concept as a concept, but you begin to see. And so that's why he would carry the prism around with him. He had already convinced himself, obviously, that there is one non-dual reality. And from the description, he already was a man of some depth of experience also. He was a very saintly sadhu. And so he was constantly driving that idea in. So it's interesting that he would not look at an object more than once, lest he be deluded by Maya and attachment. So that's extraordinary. He wouldn't look at an object more than once. Of course, we can't take that too literally, because if he went into his hut every day, he had to see the door every day. So it doesn't mean literally, but he didn't look at an object of interest, something that had no practical utility for the moment. He didn't look at that more than once, lest he develop attachment. So there are those in all spiritual traditions, whether the Hindu or the Buddhist, or the Christian or Sufi, whatever, all spiritual traditions, who go to extraordinary lengths to drive an idea into their mind. For instance, like this sadhu, of course, who wouldn't look at an object of interest more than once, lest he get attached to it. Then there was a great Russian Orthodox saint, Saint Seraphim of Sarov, who lived in the 18th and 19th century, the 1700s into the 1800s, long before the time of the revolution. And he, it is said in the oral tradition around Saint Seraphim, he used to wear over a long period in his life, he wore a bag over his, it wasn't a paper bag because they didn't have paper bags at that time, but probably a burlap bag or something, over his head with just a slit for his eyes and for his mouth so he could eat. And he wore that in order to get over the sense of personal identity. So it's an extreme step. If I start walking around with a bag over my head all of the time, people will call the psychologist first, psychiatrist, and if that doesn't work, then they'll call the paddy wagon to come pick me up. So, but he went to extraordinary lengths in order to get over the idea that I am a personal, significant, a person with a personal identity. That is, he was trying to dissolve into principle, into the in his devotion to Jesus and Mary. So this monk again wouldn't look at an object more than once. Something I don't understand, I have to say. It says he would discriminate while taking his bath. That I understand. At the sight of birds flying in the sky. Now that I don't know what that means. He would discriminate while taking his bath at the sight of birds flying in the sky. What was he discriminating about the birds while he was taking his bath? I have no idea, because he doesn't explain it. So certainly he meant something, but it's beyond me. He, this sadhu, knew grammar. He stayed here for 3 days. One day he heard the sound of a flute near the embankment and said that a man who had realized Brahman would go into samadhi at such a sound. That is because of the purity of the sound of the flute well played. Someone would go into samadhi hearing that sound. And of course, Sri Ramakrishna often went into samadhi hearing music, whether instrumental or vocal music. He would go into samadhi hearing music. Continuing, while talking about the monk, the master showed his devotees the manners and movements of a Paramahamsa, the gait of a child, face beaming with laughter, eyes swimming in joy, and body completely naked. Then he again took his seat on the small couch and poured out his soul-enthralling words. And so that it would it would be easy to caricaturize what Sri Ramakrishna did and to make it appear clownish if we tried to imitate that. But Sri Ramakrishna was a consummate actor, so convincing, again, as most of you know, that when he was practicing the bhava, the attitude of a friend of the Divine Mother, Sakhi Bhava, a female friend of the Divine Mother, that he dressed as a woman, and even in the house of Mathur Babu, his mannerisms and his facial expressions and everything were so true to what he was mimicking that Mathur Babu himself and others in the family who knew Sri Ramakrishna intimately didn't recognize him. And so he had that ability to transform himself as he acted out anything. And so he himself, being a Paramahamsa, he didn't even have to act that. He just had to change his attitude of, now I'm teaching to now I'm walking as a Paramahamsa with the gait of a child, unconcerned about anything in the world, completely free. Swami Ashokananda, one of our great Swamis who passed away long ago. In fact, he passed away right around within days of the time I joined the order. He used to say that when he first went to Belur Math, he was from East Bengal, now Bangladesh. He was from the area around Sylhet. When he first went to Belur Math and saw several of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna standing together, he said that I couldn't imagine, I never could have imagined seeing such beings that were so exalted and so free. He said just seeing them, you could see that there was such a freedom about them, such a joy about them, something transcendent about them. They didn't look like human beings at all. They looked like gods playing on the earth. And so Sri Ramakrishna was even beyond that. And so when he walked and had that expression on his face of one that was completely free as he was, then that would have been a stunning sight. So then again, he took a seat on the small couch and poured out his soul-enthralling words. Master to M. I learnt Vedanta from Nangta. Nangta, of course, means the naked one, and it refers to Totapuri. Brahman alone is real, the world is illusory. The magician performs his magic. He produces a mango tree which even bears mangoes, but this is all sleight of hand. The magician alone is real. So here he's explaining Vedanta as it was taught to him by Nangta, by Totapuri. And when sometime during this period in his life, when Sri Ramakrishna noticed that the future Swami Turiyananda, Hari Maharaj, or Hari at that time, was not coming to visit him, then when he next came after a long absence, Sri Ramakrishna asked him about his absence, and he said, well, I've been studying books like the Panchadashi. And Sri Ramakrishna said, well, what does the Panchadashi contain? Tell me, does it contain anything other than Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya? That Brahman alone is the truth, and this world is an illusion. Is there anything else in its 15 chapters? And Hari realized that, oh no, everything is just pointing towards that. That's the basic truth it's teaching. Everything else is just elaboration to try to convince the mind from different angles. But if you've understood that, you've understood everything. So Sri Ramakrishna's point was, you're studying these books instead of coming here. And Sri Ramakrishna knew that by his coming to him, his whole life would be transformed. By studying books, he would get ideas. And yes, ideas which would form the basis for spiritual practice and everything, that's true. But it would just be the ideas that you get from a book. If he would come to Sri Ramakrishna, his whole life would be transformed very quickly, because Sri Ramakrishna was not giving concepts. He was giving life. He was giving experience. He was giving direct transformative influence to those who came to him. And so here again, he's saying that Brahman alone is real, the world is illusory, the basic idea of Vedanta. Of course, there's another line in that famous saying of Shankaracharya where he says, in half a shloka, I will give the truth of Vedanta. Brahma satyam jagan mitya jivo brahmaiva na paraha. That's just the second line of the verse. That Brahman is truth, the world is illusory, and this individual soul is none other than Brahman, is Brahman itself. So he goes on, the magician performs his magic, and so the magician can even produce a mango tree with mangoes, but the magician alone is real. The rest is just appearance. And so all of this is produced by the magician Maya. In fact, the word Maya is used several times even in the early Rig Veda, but there it's used in the sense of magic. And only later, with time, it comes to be by the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, then you find that Maya is used in its later Vedantic sense. Maya, the power out of which this universe has come, out of which the one non-dual reality appears as multiplicity. So this is the great magic show. It seems that the whole of life is a long sleep. This much I understand, that we are not seeing things rightly. We perceive the world with a mind by which we cannot comprehend even the nature of the sky. So how can our perceptions be true? So here you see again, as I pointed out in a previous class recently, that M had been, and it said in the Gospel 2 or 3 classes ago, that M had been studying the non-dualist Vedanta system. And so here also you see the influence of that M is saying that we don't even see the sky correctly. How can we understand other things? That is, we see the sky as blue, but actually the sky is not blue. That's an illusion caused by the absence of light in space and the light refracting through the sky. And so we see it as blue, though it's not blue. And we take the sky in our hand and there's no color to it, but it appears blue. So we can't even see the sky correctly, something that's so much a part of our experience. So how can we understand things? How can we comprehend even the nature of the sky? How can our perceptions be correct? So then Sri Ramakrishna says, there's another way of looking at it. We do not see the sky rightly. It looks as if the sky were touching the ground at the horizon. How can a man see correctly? His mind is delirious, like the mind of a typhoid patient. So here, when we first read that, the master saying there is another way of looking at it, you think that Sri Ramakrishna is contradicting what M said, but no, he's not. He's agreeing with him. He's just saying that being Sri Ramakrishna, he probably understood that M was thinking about the blueness of the sky, that it's not blue as we think it is. And so Sri Ramakrishna said there's another way of looking at it, meaning that there's another way of looking at the sky which tells the same thing that you just told. And that is, the sky looks like it's a dome, and it looks like it meets the horizon, that it comes like this and it comes down and meets the horizon. But of course that's not true. That's not what the sky does. So how can a man see correctly, he says, again, making the same point M made, just giving another example with the same fact of the sky. And then he says that man's mind is delirious like that of a typhoid patient. That is, we see things through a fevered brain, as it were. We don't see things correctly. We see things the way the mind imagines them. And that we can see in a variety of ways. And one of the ways is through modern science. That modern science started by taking the external world for granted, that the world is what we see. It is as we see it, as we hear it, as we feel it. The world is just a given. And we want to understand it. We want to know how it's made. So let's experiment with it, see what forces are governing the world, what the parts of the world are, how we can take it apart, analyze it, and so forth. The more they did that, the further they got from our present day experience. So, as science, as physics shows us, this is mainly just empty space with far separated minute electrical charges, the protons and electrons, the electrons of the surface of the book repelling the electrons on the surface of my hand. And so I feel it to be solid. But actually, this is mainly the vast amount of this is nothing but space. The vast amount of that is nothing but space. So why can't those electrons, which are so wide apart, why can't they just go through each other? It's because of the repulsion of the charges. And so all of this is not at all what we see it to be. Now, science and scientists go to lengths to again come back and say that, well, the world is what we see. Again, they try to reestablish the world. It's they don't go to the point of saying that all of this is an illusion, but that's actually what their own discoveries point to. And so many scientists in the 20th century were trying to find some way to relate advanced scientific discoveries of theoretical physics to human experience. Because it was a disturbing fact to see that the world is not what we thought it was. And of course, Vedanta goes much further than subatomic particles and electric charges and so forth, and quarks or strings or whatever it turns out that the fundamental composition of matter is. That's still not decided. So anyway, the world is not what it seems to be, even from the standpoint of modern science. There have been many interesting experiments done, besides what I just mentioned about the physical nature of matter, many interesting experiments done about perception by neurophysiologists and others who study human perception, the ways that we see and hear and so forth, which show that we create a great deal of that which we see. They don't go as far as the school of Drishti Srishtivada in Vedanta goes, that is, that seeing is creating, that the very act of perception is creating what I'm perceiving. But they do go in that direction and show that the mind is constantly getting indications of things and then creating the total picture from just indications. And many times those indications are wrong. So again, perception is not what we think it is. The world is not what we think it is. We are not who we think we are. And even God is not who we think God is. So we're in a mess. So much of spiritual life is trying to get out of the mess, learning to see what is the truth, whether through a devotional standpoint, where God alone matters. God alone is real. God alone matters. God alone is what I seek, because God is the repository of all value and all reality, or seeking the self, seeking self-knowledge. Either way, we're seeking to get out of the wrong way of perceiving things. So the master sang in his sweet voice, "What a delirious fever is this that I suffer from? O Mother, thy grace is my only cure." So, of course, Sri Ramakrishna always came back to the devotional attitude for those who were with him, those who were close to him. And so, Mother, thy grace is my only cure. So yes, we can follow the path of knowledge and just say, I have understood this, I'm going to hold on to that idea until everything else disappears. Or we can seek divine grace and throw the burden on God. That is for most people, that is the far easier way to pray to God to reveal the truth, or to pray to God, just reveal yourself because you are the truth. Let me come to you. Let me know who you are. Let me know my being within your being. Sri Ramakrishna, that was sort of the default position that Sri Ramakrishna always returned to. Though Sri Ramakrishna had the full non-dualistic knowledge, but his default position was that of a devotee. Continuing, the master said, "Truly it is a state of delirium. Just see how worldly men quarrel among themselves. No one knows what they quarrel about, and how they quarrel. May such and such a thing befall you." How much shouting, how much abuse. That is, he's saying what people say, that, oh, may this bad thing befall you because you don't accept my words, or you're not doing what I tell you, and so forth. So how much people quarrel. And when you look at it with a little detachment, we have to develop some detachment first, but when we look at it, we find that really most of the things people are quarreling about don't matter at all. The things that we quarrel about don't matter at all. We get so involved in and so attached to a particular viewpoint that we argue till we're breathless, and in the end, who cares? Who cares? It doesn't matter. I said to Kishori, "The box is empty, there is nothing inside, but two men pull at it from either side, thinking the box contains money." "Well, the body alone is the cause of all this mischief, isn't it? The jnanis see all this and say to themselves, what a relief one feels when this pillowcase of the body drops off." So again, you see that M was, which is surprising, because M by temperament, he was so humble, he was always self-effacing. So we have stereotyped ideas. I know all of us in the tradition also stereotyped ideas about what a bhakta is, what a jnani is, etc. And so you see very bold and heroic people who are full of devotion, like Girish Chandra Ghosh. And you see very humble and sweet and self-effacing people like him, who obviously was absorbing the path of knowledge at this time. And it's surprising also because Sri Ramakrishna's teaching that is contained in the gospel is so devotional usually. Sri Ramakrishna taught both. He taught, in fact, that's what Swami Brahmananda and some others have said about the gospel, is that the gospel is a wonderful text, but you get mainly Sri Ramakrishna's emphasis on the path of devotion, because that's M came when other devotees came, and Sri Ramakrishna thought that that was appropriate for most of the devotees who were coming, because the reason for his thinking that or of course with Sri Ramakrishna it wasn't thinking, it was perceiving that it was the most effective for people, is that if we are living in the world and we have responsibilities, we have family, we have jobs, we have bills to pay, and so many civic responsibilities and so forth, that if you tell a person that this world is unreal and that you are Brahman and it's all just a house of illusion, then it takes the very floor out from under the life that they're trying to lead. And so the path of devotion doesn't remove the floor, doesn't tell you to everything's an illusion, so don't even look at it. It says, do your work as worship of God, be a servant of God, be a child of God, interact with others from that standpoint. And so it doesn't remove the very basis of your action in the world. Now, jnana can be performed by a person in the world also, and there are many examples of great householders who followed the path of knowledge. But again, for most, The path of devotion is far easier to understand, and from that perspective, to do one's necessary duties in the world. It doesn't disrupt the very foundation of one's life. But here again, you see that M was dealing with these ideas of the path of knowledge now. So again, what he said was, M says, I said to Kishori, another devotee, the box is empty, there's nothing inside, but two men pull at it from either side thinking that it contains money. And so that's an example of what we all do. We think that everything here has value. That is, it's a box full of money. And so we're tugging this way and that way. When actually the value is the divine reality, not the box itself, not this box. And so we're all fighting over this, thinking that it's full of value, but no, it's not. Let it go. So no one, well, the body alone, M continues, the body alone is the cause of all this mischief, isn't it? The Gyanis see all this and say to themselves, what a relief one feels when this pillowcase of the body falls off. So, and that's actually literally true. We're all afraid of death. That's one of the basic fear everyone has. Is the most basic fear is the fear of death. And all other fears are based on the fear of death. We're afraid of this thing, afraid of that thing, afraid of this person, or afraid of that situation and things. All of those fears are tied to the fear of death, to the fear of disappearing, to the fear of loss. And death is the basic fear that all of these other fears are tied into. But when we die, once we get to the crossing over moment, then we'll feel such joy to be rid of the body. All of us, not just advanced spiritual aspirants. Everybody will feel, my God, I'm free. I'm free. And so that's why people who have near-death experiences say that. Once they cross over, clinically they flatline and they cross over while doctors or someone is trying to revive them. They experience death, then they feel that the weight of the world has been removed. One of our devotees, Harry Greer, who died many years ago in Sacramento, he was a disciple of Swami Vishwananda. I mentioned him in another class the other day. He suddenly had, I think it was a heart failure. He was in the hospital to visit his wife, and then suddenly he almost died. And so he was on the table in the operating theater, and they were trying to revive him. And he saw himself from up above, as often people who have near-death experiences report. He saw himself outside of the body, saw his body down there, the doctors and nurses, saw his wife. And his wife started chanting Hari Om Ramakrishna, Hari Om Ramakrishna, which is what we chant when someone is dying. And he felt such irritation at his wife that she was bringing him back into the body. And he felt that as she chanted Hari Om Ramakrishna, that he was being pulled back into the body. And he felt great irritation because he found himself so free. He had never experienced bodilessness before, but having experienced it, he's realized the tremendous weight that each one of us carries. Each of us is carrying the weight of the whole universe on this. And whether it's through meditation or an altered state or death, when suddenly we find that we're free of the body, then we feel that the weight of the universe has been removed from me. So that's why M says that the body alone is the cause of all this mischief, isn't it? The Gyanis see all this and say to themselves, what a relief one feels when this pillowcase of the body falls off. So that doesn't mean that we should seek death, because death just means we'll be born again. So we don't get out of anything just by dying. It's just to say that when we are free from the body, for the time being, we feel great freedom. But then we'll have to come back until we realize the truth, or until we come to God. So the master and M went toward the Kali temple. Master, Why should you say such things? This world may be a framework of illusion, but it is also said that it is a mansion of mirth. Let the body remain. One can also turn this world into a mansion of mirth. And so Sri Ramakrishna obviously didn't approve of the negative turn that M was taking, that this body is the cause of all suffering, and what a relief when it will go. That is a sort of a death wish that M was expressing. Because M, remember, had experienced a great deal of misery. When he had come to Sri Ramakrishna, he was at the point of wanting to commit suicide. And so M had seen his share of misery, though he was only, by this time, he was something like 29 years old, but had seen plenty of misery already. And so, but the Sri Ramakrishna told him that no, why should you think that way? Just in negative terms, of sort of a hatred of the body, hatred of the world, wanting to escape from it and everything, and says that it's also said that this is a mansion of mirth. We don't see that now, admittedly. Or when we think we see it, what we're seeing is temporary relief from problems. So some problems have been solved. We've got vacation time. We go out and we party, and everything's fun. And we have a few days where we're high on life, as we say in America nowadays. But that's just artificial relief from the general course of unhappy circumstances, where we've got a few days where everything seems free and fun. So Sri Ramakrishna doesn't mean that. He means that when one begins to experience God, or begins to get intimations of the self, long before realization, one begins to feel an inner joy, a joy which is an expression of existence itself. Existence itself begins to be seen as joy. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, it says, Raso Vaisaha, that is rasa, that is the juice of joy. And that this universe, the Taittiriya Upanishad says that this universe is produced in joy, it exists in joy, and it returns to joy. And so Sri Ramakrishna is pointing to that. So instead of taking a purely negative attitude that, oh, this life is horrible, this body is horrible, death is better than living in this miserable world, why not see the other side? But the other side which comes through spiritual perception, not the other side of the person who's temporarily high on life, because that doesn't last. So, but where is unbroken bliss in this world? Master, yes, where is it? So Sri Ramakrishna admits that, yes, in this life there's not unbroken bliss. And you see, even with the Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother and Swami Vivekananda, how much they had to suffer in their lives. Now, their suffering was transformed by their spiritual knowledge. So they saw it in the context of reality. They didn't lose sight of the blissful nature of reality. But, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say, Brahman caught in the web of the five elements weeps. Meaning that even Brahman, when it incarnates as an avatar, as an incarnation of God, even Brahman weeps caught in the web of five elements. And he said that speaking about Rama, with the loss of Sita, and then all of the troubles of running the kingdom and everything, that Brahman caught in the web of five elements weeps. So Sri Ramakrishna admits to him, yes, where is unbroken bliss in this world? So Sri Ramakrishna stood in front of the shrine of Kali and prostrated himself before the Divine Mother. M followed him. Then the master sat on the lower floor in front of the shrine room, facing the blissful image, and leaned against a pillar of the Nat Mandir. He wore a red bordered cloth, part of which was on his shoulder and back. M sat by his side. So those of you who have been to Dakshineshwar can picture this, but it's hard to imagine it, because you couldn't find a time now when the temple is open where you could go in and just sort of sit up on the platform where Mother Kali is. There's no gate and no priest guarding the gate, and they're not a mile-long line of devotees waiting to get in, and people pushing and shoving. But at this time, of course, the Kali temple was separated from Calcutta in the village of Dakshineshwar, but just a few people, and then a few people would come now and then. Nowadays, of course, it's packed with crowds of people from opening until closing, not at the time of Ramakrishna. Since there is no unbroken happiness in the world, why should one assume a body at all? I know that the body is meant only to reap the results of past action, but who knows what sort of action it is performing now? The unfortunate part is that we are being crushed. So he said, why assume a body at all? Yes, if we knew the truth, we wouldn't assume a body. If we knew the truth, we wouldn't assume a body. So why assume a body at all? Because nobody asks us, would you like to assume a body? We're pushed into it. We're pushed into birth. We find ourselves born. We don't. There's a New Age idea that we all choose our parents. Well, no, that's a silly New Age idea that you choose your parents. Your parents are chosen. That is, the only sense in which we choose our parents is in the sense that our karma chooses our parents. Because of our karma, certain parents are appropriate to the working out of our karma. But it's not that there's somewhere you're sitting up above and saying, oh, I like that couple there, I think I'll be their child. But, well, no, I don't like his nose, but he has a nicer nose, I think I'll be born with that family. No, we're not asked. It's not like going to the grocery store and picking out a box of cereal among all the hundreds of varieties of cereal that I like this one. It's just we suddenly find ourselves born. And oftentimes there are people who I've known as children who thought, why was I born here? Something is wrong. I'm in the wrong place. I'm not supposed to be here. So they certainly didn't have the sense that, well, I chose this. No, they were pushed into it by karma. So M is asking why should one assume a body at all? That he says, I understand that it's meant for reaping karma. And yes, that's what the body is. It's a vehicle for experiencing past karma. So the body is bound by past karma. We're born with a body in a particular family, in particular circumstances, because of past karma. And so we come into life, we experience that karma. But then he says, but who knows what sort of action the body, is performing now? So yes, we're born because of past action, but right now we may be performing action that will cause a future birth that we won't like. So who knows what the effects of karma is? Who knows what the result of our present actions are? The unfortunate part is that we are being crushed. That in the midst of this life, we're being crushed by the wheels of karma. As Sri Krishna says in the Gita, that people are crushed on the wheel of karma. And so what is the way out? The way out, of course, is to wake up, to find God or to seek the self and find the self, one or the other. That is the way out. And so karma comes to no end by itself. One thing leads to another, and that leads to something else. Karma leads to an experience. We react to this experience, and we create more karma, good or bad. But even the good karma makes us come back in good circumstances. Maybe we come back in the child of wealthy people. But then because we're wealthy, we're not sensitive to the poor people. And then we have to come back as a poor person because we disparaged the poor and deprived them of the help we could have given them. And so one action leads to another. There's no end to it. There's no end to the cause of causation. The end to it is coming to that which is outside of the law of causation. That's the only recourse. The only way out of karma is to go to that where there is no karma. That's God or the self, which are the two faces of the same thing. God or the self, the two faces of the same thing. God is free of all karma, as Sri Krishna says over and over again in the Gita, especially in chapter 4. He expresses that very clearly, that there is no karma for God. And so if we go to God and we see that God is the doer, I'm not the doer, then we're free. Or if we go to the self, which is outside of karma, outside of causation, then we're free. So one or the other. We go to God or go to the self. And we'll find ourselves in the same place, whichever path we follow. So, Master, if a pea falls into filth, it grows into a pea plant nonetheless. The pea seed, if it falls into filth, it still grows into a pea plant. And so, even if you are born, if you have some substance to you, even if you're born in bad circumstances, that will assert itself. The pea plant, you can plant it in the most beautiful composted soil, rich and everything, and that'll produce a pea plant. You throw it into the worst rotting manure, and it'll still grow into a pea plant. So that which is, it's going to come out in time. But there are still the 8 bonds, Master. They are not 8 bonds, but 8 fetters. But what if they are? These fetters fall off in a moment by the grace of God. Do you know what it is like? Suppose a room has been kept dark 1,000 years. The moment a man brings a light into it, the darkness vanishes, not little by little. Haven't you seen the magician's feet? He takes a string with many knots, ties one end to something, keeping the other in his hand. Then he shakes the string once or twice, and immediately all the knots come undone. But another man cannot untie the knots, however he may try. All the knots of ignorance come undone in the twinkling of an eye through the Guru's grace. So that's a wonderful statement that first mentions the 8 bonds, which Sri Ramakrishna says they're not 8 bonds, they're 8 fetters. And I think what, I didn't look at the Bengali original, but I think what, and that might clarify it, but I think what Sri Ramakrishna is, the distinction he's making is that a fetter is something that you can take off. It doesn't, it's not something that is intrinsic to who you are. It's something that's tied onto you, like handcuffs or ankle shackles or whatever. It can be taken off. And so the 8 fetters are things like pride and pride of family, kula, the pride of family, pride of one's lineage, shame, shame in the sense of a guilt, lajja, grina, bhoy, teen takte noy. If you heard in Bengali, Sri Ramakrishna used to quote this saying, lajja, shyness, lajja, grina meaning ew, that sense of disgust at the things that you don't like. Grina and bhoy, fear. If you have those 3, you can't attain to God. And so the 8 fetters are things like that. I don't remember there is a traditional list of the 8 fetters, but oh, it's in the back. Ah, yes. Well, we don't need to go into them now because the time is over. People can look that up in the back if they want to. But the point is, even Sri Ramakrishna doesn't list them here. He just says that there are these 8 fetters. But through the Guru's grace, all of that can be removed in a second. Or through God's grace. Through God's grace or through the Guru's grace, all of that can be removed in a moment. He gives the example of light being brought into a dark room, a room which has been dark for ages. If you bring a light into it, the darkness doesn't take ages for the darkness to go. Darkness is collected there for ages, but in one moment, the room is illuminated. And so through grace of God or the Guru, then the darkness of ages is illuminated in a moment by the divine light. So, okay, so we'll stop here. If there are any questions, I'll answer those. And let me give announcements first and then questions. So, for announcements on Sunday, the talk will be on finding our point of rest. That is, finding the point of rest within us, so the point of stillness inside of us. On Tuesday, we'll have the Katha Upanishad class as usual at 7:30 in the evening, and next Thursday we'll have this class again, and that will be the last activity until after Labor Day. That is, we'll have no activities until the second week of September. So we're going to take the second half of July off and all of August off. Usually we take all of August off, but this year I felt the need of taking a little more time off, so take the second half of July and all of August. And so this Sunday will be the last Sunday talk, and next week will be the last Katha Upanishad class for now, and gospel class for now, and we'll resume those classes in the fall as well as Sunday lectures. So, did you see there is no light in the reality? Mind sees lights whether white or colored. How do all people see the same colors? Well, people see the same colors, we think. We don't even know if people see the same colors. There's no way to tell that people see the same colors. But we assume we do. We all agree that this is red, but there's no way of proving that you see red the same way I see it. And in fact, there's some difference at least, because some people love red, some people hate red. Some people love blue, some people say blue is depressing. Some people love green, some people hate green. Some people love orange, some people hate orange. And so if we're seeing colors all the same, why do some people have these emotional reactions? So of course, we assume that I see red as you see red, and that may be true. But that doesn't stop the fact that the reason we see red is because the mind is interpreting the wavelength of light in that way. And so assuming that we all see colors the same, it's because our brains interpret the wavelength of light in the same way. That is, it's the same interpretation. That doesn't negate the fact that there's no red out there. Red is the brain's interpretation of a wavelength of light. It doesn't matter if you were born in difficult conditions. If you have some good karma, you will find the way to freedom. Yes, exactly, Connie. That's true. That even if we're born in bad circumstances, and there are many examples in sacred literature, like Prahlada. The first name I was given when I came to Vedanta by the Swami in Chicago was Prahlad. And so Prahlad is a figure in the mythology of India who was born the child of a demon, but he was a great devotee of Vishnu from his childhood. But his father was a demon, and his father had conquered the gods and was an evil man who wanted his son to bow down to him, but his son would only bow down to Vishnu. And so his father even tried to kill him in various ways. And finally, Vishnu manifested as half lion, half man, and devoured the demon, the father. And the son was freed. Yes, it's a mythological story, but the point of it is to say that even if we're born in very bad circumstances, that if in our past, and for whatever reason, whatever karmic reason we had to be born in very bad circumstances, if that seed of spirituality has already begun to grow in us in a previous life, that's going to assert itself. So yes, we will find the way to freedom. Is the state of liberation the same for all? That's a good question also. No. We find that the state of liberation is not the same for all. There are many types, many states of liberation. So what Sri Ramakrishna showed in his life as the foundation of harmony is that it's the same reality that is experienced by people through different religious paths and in different states of higher illuminative and transformative consciousness. But we don't all experience the same. Gopalar Ma, she saw everything as Krishna. Swami Vivekananda realized everything to be the non-dual Brahman. Swami Brahmananda, he saw himself to be the eternal playmate of God. And so there are different expressions of illumination, of enlightenment. So what Sri Ramakrishna showed was that at the foundation of all of them is the same reality, that it's the same reality which appears as God, as Allah, as Jehovah, as Shiva, as Krishna, as Kali, as the Buddha nature, etc. But there are different expressions of spirituality. So according to our temperament, we will realize that aspect of reality which is appropriate to us, but it will be the same reality we're realizing, just in a different aspect. And if we go to the non-dual Brahman through any of the paths, which we can access through any of the paths, then we'll find that it is the same non-dual Brahman. In Brahman, there are no differences whatsoever, no differentiation whatsoever. And so you find Sufi saints who had the non-dual experience. You find Christian saints who had that, Jewish saints who had that, Buddhist saints who had that. So if we go far enough, we come to the same reality. But we can be liberated even without getting there. Liberation means when the bondage of karma has been broken and there's no need to be forcibly reborn. Then we remain with God. And that can come when we have completely surrendered the sense of doership to God. Or it can come through identifying with consciousness or in different ways. But the essence of liberation is to be freed from the sense that I am the doer, and I am the doer and the receiver of experiences. So we can get rid of that through devotion, through knowledge, through work, etc. And that is liberation. Enlightenment is different. If we're liberated, then yes, we have a stage of enlightenment. But enlightenment refers to the content of the experience. Liberation refers to what we're free from. We're freed from bondage. Enlightenment means the positive content of what we experience. And so that can be devotional. It can be, like for the Buddhists, it's a state. For the Vedantins, it's not a state, it's beyond states. And for devotional people, it's going to Kailasa, to Vaikuntha, to Ramakrishna Loka, etc. So that may be seen differently by different people. But the essence of it is the same reality. It's the same reality which expresses itself as God, as Allah, as Jesus, as Buddha, as Ramakrishna, as Krishna, as Kali, etc. Are there any questions from the audience here? Oh, there's one more. Okay. Okay, yes, okay. We see that Sri Ramakrishna tailored his teachings depending on the nature of the student. Is it possible for a seeker to know this without the guidance of a guru? It is possible. It's not easy, but certainly it's possible. It takes a lot of self-knowledge, a lot of self-inquiry, and experimentation. However, there are sometimes people who, from an early age, have a clear-cut temperament. I've known people like someone I knew in Puerto Rico who was very devotional. If he heard anyone talking about Advaitic knowledge, he would leave the room. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want anything to do with it. He was very devotional, very ritualistic and everything. And there's some people who, from an early age, they only want to hear the path of knowledge. The God and all God talk is nonsense to them, and they don't like it. They feel irritated by it. And so there's some people with a very clear-cut temperament. And so it doesn't have to be accompanied by irritation. It doesn't have to be like the Jnani who's irritated by devotional talk or the Bhakta who's irritated by Jnani talk. It can just be a simple, strong orientation. But most of us, it takes time to find out what our orientation is. We read Raja Yoga and we think, oh, I want to be a Raja Yogi. And then we come to Karma Yoga and think, no, I think Karma Yoga really sounds so nice. And then we read Bhakti and we think, well, that's maybe my yoga. And then we read Jnana and think, well, I like that too. So what am I supposed to do? So then we have to experiment and so forth. And if we have a teacher, the teacher can help us. But in the absence of a teacher, we have to figure it out. And let me just say one other thing on that to make it a little clearer, hopefully. If you find that when reading different things, different kinds of texts, and you may like all of them, but you find that the particular ideas that always appeal to you no matter where you find it, whether you find them in a book on devotional mystics or jnanis or Christian mystics or Sufi mystics, but this idea always appeals to you, then you begin to get a clue that this is something that's important to me. So in that way, you begin to figure out what you are. So with that, I'll give the closing chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhaktanukampa Vigraham Vai Ishavataram Parameshamidyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow in adoration to Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, eternal, infinite, the worshipful Supreme Lord, who took human birth out of compassion for all. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us and to all the beings of the universe.